The yellowed contract bearing her father's signature made the billionaire face drain of color as his crystal wineglass slipped from his fingers, shattering like the lies that had surrounded Charlotte's life for 28 years. That single moment in the upscale restaurant would unravel a web of corporate espionage, government conspiracy, and a $40 billion secret that powerful men would kill to protect. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. A single signature can change the course of a life or end it. For Charlotte Meyer, that looping scrawl at the bottom of a decades-old document was more than just ink on paper. It was the last remaining trace of the father she never knew. For Maxwell Harrington, Billionaire CEO of Harrington Global Enterprises, it was a ghost from the past he'd spent his entire adult life trying to exorcise. She was just trying to make rent. He was just another wealthy patron enjoying an overpriced dinner. But when she placed that yellow document beside his glass of Bordeaux, the carefully constructed walls of his empire began to crumble like a house of cards caught in a storm. This isn't a Cinderella story. This is about how a waitress with nothing to lose and everything to prove brought one of America's most powerful men to his knees with 4 simple words: "That's my father's signature." The chandelier light caught the crystal glasses, casting prismatic reflections across the crisp white tablecloths of Lucille, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Charlotte Meyer moved with practiced grace between tables, her black vest and white shirt a stark contrast against the opulent surroundings. 28, she had mastered the art of invisibility, seen only when needed, forgotten the moment she stepped away. That's how the ultra-wealthy preferred their service staff: efficient, silent, invisible. The reservation book had been buzzing all day with the news. Maxwell Harrington had requested his usual table by the windows overlooking Central Park. Charlotte had never served him before, but his reputation preceded him. Ruthless in business, generous with tips, impossible to please. The other servers drew straws, and Charlotte, new to the evening shift, had drawn the short one. "Don't make eye contact unless spoken to," whispered Marcus, the head waiter, as he adjusted her tie. Harrington likes his Bordeaux decanted exactly 17 minutes before serving, not a minute more or less. And whatever you do, don't engage in small talk. The last server who asked about his day was fired before the end of the shift. Charlotte nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She needed this job. The envelope in her locker, the one containing the eviction notice for her mother's apartment, was a constant reminder of just how precarious their situation had become. Her mother's medical bills had piled up faster than Charlotte could pay them down, and her meager savings were long gone. "He's here," Marcus hissed, and the entire staff straightened like soldiers preparing for inspection. Maxwell Harrington entered alone, his bespoke charcoal suit tailored to perfection on his tall frame. His silver hair and patrician features gave him the look of an aging film star rather than the head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. At 63, he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the world bending to his will. Marcus seated him with a flourish, and Charlotte approached with the wine list. "Harrington? Welcome back to Lucille. Would you like to see the wine list tonight, or shall I bring your usual?" Her voice was steady, professional, betraying none of the anxiety churning in her stomach. He didn't look up from his phone. "The 2005 Chateau Margaux. Excellent choice, sir. I'll have that decanted right away." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "You're new." It wasn't a question, but Charlotte answered anyway. "Yes, sir. This is my 3rd week on the evening shift." His pale blue eyes assessed her with clinical detachment. "And your name?" "Charlotte Meyer, sir." Something flickered across his face, so brief she might have imagined it before his expression returned to its mask of indifference. "Well, Charlotte Meyer, let's see if you can get through an entire meal without disappointing me." She retreated to the wine cellar, her hands shaking slightly as she located the bottle. It was priced at over $2,000 more than her monthly rent. She handled it as if it were made of spun glass, carefully removing the cork and decanting it with precision. 17 minutes. She set a timer on her watch. While she waited, Charlotte found herself in the quiet back hallway, leaning against the wall, breathing deeply to calm her nerves. Her hand unconsciously went to the inner pocket of her vest, where she kept the folded document that had arrived in her mother's mailbox 3 days ago. It had come with no letter of explanation, no return address, just a manila envelope containing a single sheet of yellowed paper, a contract dated May 15th, 1989, between Harrington Technologies, the predecessor to Harrington Global, and Meyer Engineering Solutions. At the bottom were 2 signatures, Maxwell Harrington and Jonathan Meyer, the father Charlotte had never met, who had died before she was born. Her mother had always been vague about Jonathan, saying only that he was brilliant but troubled, and that he had died in an accident when Charlotte was still in the womb. The contract in Charlotte's pocket was the first tangible connection to him she'd ever had. The timer on her watch beeped. 17 minutes exactly. She composed herself and carried the decanter to Harrington's table, pouring with the practiced precision that had earned her the coveted evening shift. "Your Bordeaux, Mr. Harrington. Would you like to hear tonight's specials?" He waved his hand dismissively. "The usual. Rare filet, no sauce on the side." Charlotte nodded and turned to leave, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the weight of the document in her pocket. Or maybe it was the dismissive way he treated her, as if she were less than human. Something deep inside her, some reckless, desperate part, made her turn back. "Mere Harrington, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe I have something that might interest you." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Unless it's my steak, I doubt it very much." Charlotte's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. With trembling fingers, she reached into her vest pocket and withdrew the folded document. She unfolded it carefully and placed it beside his wineglass. "I recently came into possession of this contract. It has your signature, ... and my father's." Harrington glanced down at the paper, annoyance etched on his face. Then his expression changed. The blood drained from his features as if someone had pulled a plug. His hand, reaching for his wineglass, froze midair, then jerked spasmodically. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's my father's signature," Charlotte said, pointing to the bottom of the page. "Jonathan Meyer." The wineglass toppled, its contents spilling across the pristine white tablecloth like blood. The deep red liquid spread, soaking into the fabric, a stain impossible to remove. Harrington stared at her, his face a mask of shock and, was it fear? His eyes, previously cold and dismissive, now burned with an intensity that made Charlotte step back. "Where'd you get this?" His voice was a harsh whisper, his gaze darting around the restaurant as if checking for eavesdroppers. "It came in the mail to my mother's address. No sender information. ... Single quotes." Harrington's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "You have no idea what you're holding. No idea what you're doing." Charlotte tried to pull away, but his grip tightened painfully. Around them, other diners were beginning to notice the commotion. Marcus was approaching with a look of alarm. "Is there a problem, Mr. Harrington?" the head waiter asked. Harrington released Charlotte's wrist as if it had burned him. With remarkable speed, he regained his composure, his face settling back into its aristocratic mask. "No problem at all. I seem to have had a clumsy moment with my wine." His voice was smooth, controlled, betraying none of the panic that had gripped him moments before. "Miss Meyer was just assisting me." Marcus looked unconvinced but nodded respectfully. "I'll have another glass brought immediately, sir. And a fresh tablecloth." "That won't be necessary," Harrington said, standing abruptly. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sleek leather wallet, placing several $100 bills on the table. "I find I've lost my appetite." He folded the contract with deliberate care and held it out to Charlotte. Quote, when she reached for it, he didn't let go immediately, forcing her to meet his gaze. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Not here. Not now. My car will be waiting for you when your shift ends. If you value your safety and your mother's, you'll be in it." The threat was unmistakable, wrapped though it was in the veneer of concern. Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. "How do you know about my mother?" A cold smile touched his lips but didn't reach his eyes. "I make it my business to know everything, Miss Meyer. Everything and everyone." He released the document and strode toward the exit, his tall figure cutting through the crowded restaurant like a shark through shallow water. Conversations hushed as he passed, diners instinctively sensing the storm cloud of his rage. Charlotte stood frozen, the contract clutched in her hand, the red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like an omen. She had expected surprise, perhaps even recognition. She had not expected terror. What was in this contract that could make one of the most powerful men in New York pale with fear? Marcus approached, his face tight with barely contained fury. "What did you do?" Charlotte looked down at the sodden tablecloth, then back at the retreating figure of Maxwell Harrington. "I think I just made a terrible mistake." In the kitchen, away from the judging eyes of the other diners, Marcus laid into her with quiet intensity. "Do you have any idea who that man is? What he can do? People who cross Maxwell Harrington don't just lose their jobs, Charlotte. They lose everything." Charlotte's hands trembled as she folded the contract back into her pocket. "He knows my mother. He threatened her." Marcus's anger faltered, replaced by genuine concern. "Then God help you both." Outside Lucille, a sleek black Bentley idled at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the city lights like a dark mirror. Inside sat Maxwell Harrington, his phone pressed to his ear. "Find out everything about Charlotte Meyer and her mother," he commanded, his voice glacial. "I want to know who sent her that contract and why. And prepare the penthouse conference room. We're gonna have a visitor tonight." He ended the call and stared out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. His empire spread before him like a constellation of stars. But for the first time in decades, Maxwell Harrington felt the cold grip of fear. Someone out there knew the truth about Jonathan Meyer. Someone was trying to bring him down, and they were using a waitress to do it. The remainder of Charlotte's shift passed in a blur of trembling hands and racing thoughts. Marcus had assigned her to polishing silverware in the back, away from the prying eyes of the other diners. Word of her confrontation with Maxwell Harrington had spread through the restaurant staff like wildfire, igniting a mixture of morbid curiosity and grim predictions about her future employment prospect. "You're lucky he didn't demand you be fired on the spot," said Lucia, one of the senior servers, as she dropped off a tray of dirty dishes. "I once saw him reduce the sommelier at per se to tears because the wine was 2 degrees too warm." Charlotte kept her head down, focusing on the repetitive motion of cloth against silver. "I don't understand why he reacted that way. It's just an old contract," Lucia snorted. "Nothing is just anything when it comes to men like Harrington. They build fortresses around their pasts. You found a crack in the wall." By the time her shift ended at 11 p.m., Charlotte had convinced herself that the black Bentley would be gone, that Harrington's threat had been a momentary impulse, forgotten as soon as he returned to his rarefied world of penthouses and board meetings. But she stepped out of the employed entrance into the damp September night. The car was there, its engine purring quietly, exhaust condensing in the cool air, the rear window lowered silently. Harrington's face was in shadow, but his voice carried clearly. "Get in, Miss Meyer." Charlotte hesitated, clutching her bag to her chest. "I should call my mother first," he worried. "Your mother's already aware of your detour." There was something in his tone and knowledge that sent a chill down Charlotte's spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I took the liberty of sending a car for Mrs. Catherine Meyer at her apartment on West 137th Street. She's currently waiting at my penthouse, enjoying what I'm told is a quite excellent cup of tea." His voice remained casual, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the effective kidnapping of her mother. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. "If you've hurt her, please, Miss Meyer. I'm a businessman, not a monster." The door swung open. "Now get in." I dislike repeating myself. The interior of the Bentley was a cocoon of soft leather and hushed silence. Harrington sat opposite her, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone as they pulled away from the curb. Up close, the lines around his eyes and mouth were more pronounced, mapping decades of stress and power. "You should know," he said without looking up, "that threatening a man like me is extremely unwise." Charlotte's fear began to give way to indignation. "I didn't threaten you. I showed you a document that happens to have my father's signature on it. Your reaction is what turned this into ... Whatever this is." Harrington finally looked up, his gaze sharp and assessing. "And you expect me to believe that the timing is coincidental? 3 weeks before the largest merger in Harrington Global's history, a waitress who happens to be Jonathan Meyer's daughter appears at my regular restaurant with a contract that should have been destroyed 30 years ago? I don't know anything about a merger. I'm just trying to find out about my father. Who sent you the contract? I told you I don't know. It came in the mail with no return address." Harrington's eyes narrowed. "Who else have you shown it to?" "No one, just my mother. And now you, your mother." Something passed across his face, a flicker of emotion Charlotte couldn't identify. "And what did Catherine say when she saw it?" The use of her mother's first name didn't escape Charlotte's notice. "She turned white like she'd seen a ghost. Then she started crying. She wouldn't tell me why." Harrington nodded as if this confirmed something. He reached for a crystal decanter in the car's built-in bar and poured himself 2 fingers of amber liquid. "Would you like a drink, Miss Meyer? You look like you could use one." "No, thank you. I'd like to see my mother. All in good time." He swirled the liquor, watching the play of light through the glass. "Tell me, what do you know about your father?" Charlotte hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal to this man who had effectively strong-armed her into his car. But if she wanted answers, she needed to give something in return. "Almost nothing. He died before I was born. A car accident," my mother said. "She doesn't like talking about him, says it's too painful. All I know is that he was an engineer, brilliant but troubled. The contract is the first real thing of his I've ever seen." Harrington took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving her face. "Jonathan Meyer was more than brilliant. He was a genius, the kind that appears once in a generation. But your mother was right about one thing: he was troubled, deeply so." The car slowed as it approached a towering glass skyscraper in Midtown, the name Harrington emblazoned in illuminated letters near the top. Charlotte felt a surge of vertigo looking up at it. 50, 60, maybe 70 stories of gleaming glass and steel, a monument to wealth and power. Was the car accident real? she asked suddenly, the question that had been forming in her mind since Harrington's reaction at the restaurant. He finished his drink before answering, setting the empty glass in a holder with deliberate precision. No. The single word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Before Charlotte could respond, the car came to a stop in a private underground garage. A security guard in a dark suit opened the door, nodding deferentially to Harrington. "Welcome back, Mr. Harrington." "Thank you, James. Make sure we're not disturbed." Harrington stepped out, then turned to Charlotte. "Your mother is waiting. I imagine you both have questions." The elevator ride to the penthouse was swift and silent. Charlotte's mind raced with possibilities. If her father hadn't died in a car accident, what had happened, and why had her mother lied all these years? The elevator doors opened directly into a vast space of marble and glass. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan at night, a glittering carpet of light stretching to the horizon. Standing near one of those windows, her back to the elevator, was Catherine Meyer. At 55, Catherine still retained the willowy elegance that had drawn stares in her youth. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in its usual practical bun, but she had changed from her home nurse's scrubs into a simple black dress that Charlotte had never seen before. "Mom?" Catherine turned, and Charlotte was struck by the transformation in her face, and the perpetual worry lines around her mouth had smoothed, and her eyes held a clarity that Charlotte hadn't seen in years, not since before the diagnosis of early-onset Parkinson's that had forced her into early retirement. "Charlotte." Catherine's voice was steady, her hands usually trembling with the first stages of her disease calm at her sides. "I see you've met Max." Max? The familiar shortening of Harrington's name caught Charlotte off guard. She looked between her mother and the billionaire, noticing for the first time a current of unspoken communication passing between them. "You know each other," it wasn't a question. "Yes," Catherine said simply. "We have for a very long time." Harrington Max moved to a sideboard and poured another drink. "Catherine was Jonathan's wife. My best friend's wife. Of course we know each other, best friend." The words didn't align with anything Charlotte had imagined. "I don't understand." "Sit down, Charlotte," her mother said, gesturing gesturing to a sleek sofa in the center of the room. It's time you knew the truth about everything. Charlotte sank onto the sofa, suddenly feeling as if the floor beneath her was shifting. Her mother and Harrington remained standing, like sentinels on either side of her. The contract you found, Catherine began, her voice soft but steady, was the beginning of the end. It was supposed to make your father's fortune, our fortune. Instead, it destroyed him. Single quotes, Harrington's jaw tight. That's one interpretation. Catherine shot him a look that surprised Charlotte with its ferocity. It's the truth, Max. After all these years, at least give her that. He subsided, moving to the window to stare out at his empire. Your father and Max were roommates at MIT, Catherine continued. Both brilliant, both ambitious, but in different ways. Max wanted to build an empire. Jonathan just wanted to create. They were the perfect team, the visionary and the architect. We were going to change the world, Harrington said quietly, his back still turned. And we did, just not together. The contract you found was for a revolutionary microprocessor design, Catherine explained. The quantum leap that made Harrington Technologies the giant it is today. But the design wasn't Max's, it was your father's. Charlotte looked at Harrington's rigid back, then at her mother's composed face. So my father worked for him, was an employee? No, Catherine said. They were partners, 50-50 from the beginning. The contract you found was their agreement to formalize the partnership for that specific project. The quantum architecture that became the foundation of everything Harrington does today. Harrington turned, his face hard. The partnership dissolved when Jonathan proved himself unstable, unreliable. He was ill, Catherine snapped. He needed help, not abandonment. He was dangerous, Harrington countered, to himself and others. Charlotte felt as if she were watching a tennis match, volleys of an old argument bouncing back and forth over her head. What happened to him? If not a car accident, then what? A heavy silence fell. Catherine looked at Harrington, something passing between them, a silent negotiation of what version of the truth Charlotte would be permitted to hear. Your father suffered from bipolar disorder with psychotic features, Catherine finally said. It was manageable with medication, but he hated how the drugs dulled his creativity. He would go off them when he was working on something important, like the quantum architecture, Charlotte guessed. Yes, he went off his medication, worked for 72 hours straight, and produced something revolutionary. Then he crashed. Hard, Catherine's voice caught. When he came out of it, he was paranoid. He accused Max of trying to steal his work, of conspiring against him. He destroyed his lab, his notes, everything, except that contract, Harrington added. I thought all copies were destroyed decades ago. So did I, Catherine admitted. Charlotte's head was spinning with revelations. But what happened to him? How did he die? Another loaded silence. This time it was Harrington who broke it. Your father committed suicide, Miss Meyer. He jumped from the roof of my first corporate headquarters 2 months before you were born. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion. The car accident story was fabricated to spare your mother additional pain and to protect you from the stigma, a decision I championed and financed. Charlotte felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. She looked at her mother, who had tears streaming silently down her cheeks. All these years, Charlotte whispered, my whole life has been built on a lie. On mercy, Harrington corrected, and on a promise I made to a brilliant, tormented man who was once my closest friend, promised to take care of his family when he no longer could. The implications of his words began to settle on Charlotte's shoulders. The mysterious benefactor who had paid for her mother's medical treatments when insurance refused. The unexpected scholarship that had covered her college education. The lucky break that had landed her the job at LaSalle 3 weeks ago. Despite her limited experience, it hadn't been luck at all. It had been Maxwell Harrington pulling strings from the shadows of her life. You've been watching us, she said, the realization dawning. All this time, Harrington didn't deny it. I keep my promises, Miss Meyer, always. Charlotte stared at the polished marble floor, trying to process the cascade of revelations. Her entire understanding of her life's foundation had just crumbled beneath her. The father she had imagined, a shadowy but ultimately normal figure who had died in a tragic accident, was replaced by a brilliant, mentally ill man who had taken his own life. And the billionaire she had confronted hours earlier had been silently orchestrating her life from behind a curtain of wealth and power. Why now? She finally asked, looking up at Harrington. If you've been watching us all these years, why arrange for me to work at LaSalle? Why put me in your path? Harrington's expression hardened. I didn't. Then who did? That, he said, is precisely what I intend to find out. He withdrew his phone and tapped out a message. Someone went to considerable trouble to place Jonathan Meyer's daughter in my restaurant, with a contract that should not exist, precisely when it would cause maximum damage. Damage to what? Charlotte pressed. As I mentioned in the car, Harrington Global is 3 weeks away from the largest merger in our history. A $50 billion integration with Asahi Quantum Technologies. If certain historical complications were to become public now, it could jeopardize everything. By historical complications, you mean my father's contributions to your empire? Charlotte's voice had an edge that surprised even her. Harrington's eyes narrowed. Your father was brilliant, but unstable. The quantum architecture was his vision, yes, but I was the one who refined it, productized it, and built an empire around it while he was descending into paranoia and self-destruction. Max, Catherine interjected, her voice sharp. Don't. A tense silence fell. Charlotte looked between them, sensing layers of history and unspoken truths hovering just beyond her reach. Someone sent you that contract for a reason, Harrington continued, voice calmer now. They wanted you to confront me. The question is, who stands to gain from disrupting the Asahi merger? The elevator doors opened, interrupting his speculation. A tall woman with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun stepped into the penthouse. She wore a tailored suit despite the late hour and carried a slim leather portfolio. Diane Harrington greeted her. Thank you for coming so quickly. Of course. Her sharp eyes took in Charlotte and Catherine, assessing them with clinical detachment. These are our guests. This is Catherine Meyer and her daughter Charlotte. Ladies, this is Diane Powell, Harrington Global's chief legal officer and my most trusted advisor. Powell's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes at the name Meyer. I see. And the situation, Harrington gestured to the contract which lay on a glass coffee table. Someone has resurrected the original Meyer-Harrington agreement from 1989. I need to know who, why, and how much damage they can do with it. Powell picked up the document with gloved hands, examining it with the care of an archaeologist handling a precious artifact. This appears authentic. The watermark, the paper stock, even your signature before you developed that distinctive flourish in the ages. She looked up sharply. Where did it come from? It was mailed to me, Charlotte answered. No return address, no note. 3 days ago, Catherine added quietly. May 12th. Powell and Harrington exchanged a significant look. The day the Asahi merger was announced to the board, Powell said. Harrington nodded grimly. Not a coincidence. Charlotte felt like she was watching a chess match where she couldn't see half this. Can someone please explain what this contract actually means? Why would it threaten your merger? Powell looked to Harrington, who gave a slight nod. The agreement stipulates that Jonathan Meyer and Maxwell Harrington would share equally in all profits derived from the quantum architecture, Powell explained. It contains no termination clause, no buyout provision, and she turned the page. A hereditary succession clause. Meaning what? Charlotte asked, though she was beginning to understand. Meaning that upon the death of either partner, their share of the ongoing profits would transfer to their designated heir. Powell looked directly at Charlotte, which in your father's case would be you. The implications hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Are you saying that I own half of Harrington Global? No, Harrington said sharply. The partnership was dissolved when your father destroyed his lab and threatened to expose proprietary designs to competitors. I rebuilt everything from scratch. But there was no formal dissolution, Powell countered, her tone carefully neutral. From a strictly legal perspective, the contract remained in force. My father was ill, Charlotte said, the pieces falling into place. He wasn't thinking clearly. You took advantage of his condition to push him out. I protected the company, our company, from his self-destruction, Harrington snapped. Jonathan was brilliant, but he was a liability. His paranoia was escalating. He accused me of bugging his house, following him, poisoning him. He threatened to sell our work to the Chinese if I didn't confess to conspiracies that existed only in his mind. Catherine made a small sound of distress. It wasn't his fault. The disease, I know that, Cat, Harrington said, his voice softening. I never blamed him for being ill. But I had employees, investors, responsibilities. I couldn't let everything we'd built collapse because Jonathan refused to stay on his medication. Charlotte looked at her mother. Did you know about this contract? About the inheritance clause? Catherine shook her head slowly. Jonathan mentioned something about protecting your future, but I thought... After he died, Max told me there was nothing, that everything had been destroyed, because that's what Jonathan told me, Harrington insisted. The night before he jumped, he called me. Said he'd burned everything that I'd won, that there was nothing left to fight over. Powell was still examining the contract. This is the real article, original ink, original paper, not a copy. She looked up at Harrington, her expression grave. This became public if Ms. Meyer here decided to press her claim. It could trigger a control crisis right as the Asahi deal is closing. The stock would tank. How much? Charlotte asked suddenly. How much would half of the profits from my father's design be worth today? A heavy silence filled the room. The quantum architecture is the foundation of approximately 70% of Harrington Global's current product line, Powell said finally. Half of those profits compounded over 30 years with interest ... single quotes. She paused, calculating. Somewhere in the vicinity of $22 billion. The number hung in the air, almost too large to comprehend. That's absurd, Harrington said, but his voice lacked conviction. No court would award such a sum based on a 30-year-old contract. Perhaps not, Powell conceded, but the publicity alone would be devastating. Billionaire built empire on stolen design from mentally ill partner who committed suicide. The headlines write themselves. Single quotes. Charlotte felt dizzy. $22 billion. The amount was meaningless, abstract, like trying to count the stars, yet at the same time it represented decades of her mother's struggles. The tiny apartment they could barely afford, the medical bills that kept them in perpetual debt, the second and third jobs Charlotte had worked to help make ends meet, all while Maxwell Harrington had lived in penthouses and flown private jets, built on the foundation of her father's genius. This is why someone sent you the contract, Harrington said, watching her face. They're counting on you to be angry, to want revenge, or at least money. They want you to threaten me, to go public, to derail the merger. Why shouldn't I? Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been lying to me my entire life, pulling strings, watching from a distance, playing God. Meanwhile, my mother can barely afford her medication." Catherine reached for her daughter's hand. "Charlotte, it's not that simple. Max has helped us." "Helped us?" Charlotte withdrew her hand. "We've been struggling to survive while he's been sitting on billions that should rightfully be half yours. How is that helping?" "I set up a trust," Harrington said, his voice tight. "It paid for your education, for Catherine's medical care." "Crumbs," Charlotte interrupted. "Conscience money." Harrington's face flushed with anger. "I don't have to justify myself to you. I made a promise to Jonathan to look after his family, and I've kept it in my own way." "Your way," Charlotte echoed. "Always your way, just like with my father." "Charlotte, please," Catherine pleaded. "There are things you don't understand, things that happened between Max and your father." "Then explain them to me," Charlotte demanded. "All of it. No more secrets." Catherine and Harrington exchanged a long look, decades of shared history passing between them. Finally, Harrington nodded. "Show her," he said quietly. Catherine's hand went to the small pendant she always wore, a simple silver disc on a chain. With trembling fingers, she unclasped it and handed it to Charlotte. "It's not just a necklace," Catherine said. "Press the edge, right at the 3 o'clock position." Charlotte did as instructed. The pendant clicked open like a locket, revealing a small storage compartment. Inside was a tiny metal key. "What is this?" "The key to a safety deposit box," Catherine explained. "At Citibank on Madison Avenue, box number 1989. The year of the contract," Charlotte realized. Catherine nodded. "Your father set it up a month before he died. He gave me the key, made me promise to keep it safe. Said it contained the truth insurance, he called it, in case anything happened to him." "You've never opened it?" Charlotte asked incredulously. "I was pregnant, devastated, alone," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "After Jonathan died, Max offered security, protection. He said if I opened that box, it might put us both in danger, that Jonathan's paranoia had made him dangerous to himself and others. I chose safety for you, for us." Charlotte closed her fist around the key, feeling its teeth bite into her palm. "And you've just carried this around your neck for 28 years? Never once wondering what was inside?" "Of course I wondered," Catherine whispered. "Every day." Powell had been watching the exchange with sharp eyes. "Harrington, as your legal counsel, I strongly advise against pursuing this course of action." "Whatever is in that safety deposit box could be nothing," Harrington interrupted. Jonathan's paranoia manifested in increasingly bizarre behaviors toward the end. The box could contain gibberish, newspaper clippings, random objects he imbued with imaginary significance. "Or it could contain proof," Charlotte said, "of whatever you're so afraid might come to light." Harrington's expression was unreadable. "There's only one way to find out." The sun was rising over Manhattan by the time decisions were made. After hours of tense discussion, Powell had departed to begin damage control preparations, leaving Harrington, Catherine, and Charlotte in an uneasy truce. It was agreed they would visit the safety deposit box at the bank's opening, a compromise between Charlotte's demand for immediate answers and Harrington's insistence on methodical caution. "You should get some rest," Harrington told them, gesturing to a hallway. "There are guest rooms. We'll leave at 9. Catherine accepted gratefully, the toll of the night's revelations visible in the deepened lines of her face. Charlotte, however, felt wired, her mind racing too quickly for sleep. "I need some air," she said, moving toward the expansive terrace that wrapped around the penthouse. Outside, the pre-dawn air was cool against her skin. The city stretched below her, a sprawling grid of lights and shadows on the cusp of waking. Charlotte leaned against the railing, trying to reconcile the seismic shifts in her understanding of her life. The soft click of the terrace door announced Harrington's presence. He joined her at the railing, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, small concessions to the long night. In the dim light, the sharp edges of his face seemed softer, the lines deeper. "Your mother finally fell asleep," he said, staring out at the horizon where the first hints of pink and gold were beginning to appear. "She's good at that," Charlotte replied, compartmentalizing. "She had to be, raising me alone while working double shifts." Harrington absorbed the barb without reaction. "Catherine is the strongest person I've ever known. Were you in love with her?" The question had been forming in Charlotte's mind since she'd witnessed the complex, charged dynamic between them. Harrington's silence stretched so long that Charlotte thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. "We were 22 when Jonathan brought her to the lab for the first time. Brilliant, beautiful, fierce. I knew immediately why he'd fallen for her." He paused, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And yes, for a time I envied him, but Catherine only ever had eyes for Jonathan, and I valued their friendship, both their friendships, too much to interfere. But after he died, she was pregnant with you, grieving, vulnerable. It would have been ... unappropriate." Harrington's knuckles whitened on the railing. "I offered financial support, but she refused anything that felt like charity. She'd only accept help for you, your education, opportunities. Everything else she insisted on earning herself." Charlotte absorbed this, trying to imagine her proud, independent mother turning down help even when she needed it most. It rang true. "Why the charade?" she asked. "The secret arrangement, the distance, the lies about how my father died." "Why not just tell me the truth?" "Because the truth is complicated and dangerous," Harrington replied. "And not just for my reputation. There were other factors, other players." "Like who?" Harrington hesitated. "Your father had enemies besides his own demons, Charlotte. People who wanted to exploit his genius, who saw him as an asset to be acquired rather than a human being to be helped. You're being cryptic again. Because I don't know what's in that safety deposit box, Harrington admitted. And until I do, I need to be careful about what I tell you. Jonathan was convinced someone was after him in those final weeks. I dismissed it as paranoia, but ... single quotes he trailed off. But what if he was right? Charlotte finished. Harrington nodded. Precisely. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching the city awaken beneath them. Finally, Charlotte voiced the question that had been gnawing at her since the revelations began. What happens if the box contains proof that you did steal his work, that you pushed him out, took advantage of his illness? Harrington's expression hardened. I didn't steal anything. I protected and developed what we built together after he became too unstable to continue. Without sharing the profits with his heir, I kept you safe, he countered. Both of you. Safe, but struggling, Charlotte said. While you became one of the richest men in the world. Harrington turned to face her fully. What do you want, Charlotte? Money? Recognition for Jonathan? Revenge? I want the truth, she said simply. After that, we'll see. The truth proved elusive even as they sat in the sterile confines of Citibank's private client room 3 hours later. The safety deposit box, a medium-sized metal rectangle, lay on the polished table between them. Catherine's hands trembled as she inserted the tiny key, turning it with a soft click. The lid lifted to reveal a stack of papers, a small leather notebook, and a USB drive that looked antiquated by today's standards. That's it, Charlotte said, unable to hide her disappointment. She had expected something more dramatic, smoking gun evidence perhaps, or a confession. Harrington reached for the USB drive. This technology would have been cutting edge in 1989, he mused, but finding a computer that can still read it could be challenging. My department has a tech forensics lab with legacy equipment, Powell said from the doorway, having joined them after handling what she described as preliminary containment measures. We should be able to access whatever's on it. Charlotte picked up the notebook, flipping through pages filled with her father's cramped, angular handwriting, a mix of equations, diagrams, and increasingly paranoid rambling. The early entries were coherent, brilliant even to her untrained eye. But as she progressed through the pages, the writing became more erratic, the content more disturbed. Asterisk, they're watching me. M says I'm imagining things, but I see them. Black car, same license plate, following me to and from the lab. Listening devices in the apartment, can't trust the phone. Asterisk and later. Asterisk M, acting strained, distant. Says I need to take the meds, but they cloud everything. Can't think with them, can't see with them. He wants me dulled because he knows I'm close to the truth. Asterisk. Charlotte looked up to find Harrington reading over her shoulder, his expression grim. This was the disease talking, he said quietly. Jonathan was brilliant, but when the paranoia took hold, he created connections and conspiracies that weren't there. Are you sure? Charlotte challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like he had good reason to be suspicious of. Catherine intervened, reaching for the stack of papers. Let's see what else is here before we jump to conclusions. The papers appeared to be a mix of technical documentation, personal correspondence, and legal notes. One document in particular caught Powell's attention, a formal letter on Pierce and Lauder letterhead, dated 2 weeks before Jonathan Meyer's death. Pierce and Lauder was the law firm representing Harrington Technologies at the time, Powell explained, scanning the contents. This is ... Interesting. What is it? Harrington demanded. A proposed settlement agreement, Powell said, her expression carefully neutral, offering Jonathan Meyer $5 million in exchange for relinquishing all claims to the quantum architecture with a non-disclosure clause. She looked up. It's not signed. I don't remember this, Harrington said, reaching for the document. You wouldn't have, Powell replied. Look at this signature line. It wasn't prepared by you or on your instructions. It's prepared by James Pierce. Your father? Charlotte asked, connecting the dots. Harrington's face had gone pale. My father was chairman of the board at the time, but he wasn't involved in day-to-day operations. He had no authority to make this offer. Apparently, he did it anyway, Powell observed. Catherine was examining another document, her hands now steady with purpose. There's more. Phone records showing calls from the Pierce residence to our apartment. And this, she held up a black and white photograph showing a younger version of herself pushing a shopping cart in a grocery store parking lot. On the back was written, asterisk insurance policy. She doesn't need to be involved. Asterisk, that's my father's handwriting, Harrington said, his voice hollow. The implications hung in the air. James Pierce, the patriarch of the Harrington Empire, the company had been renamed after Maxwell took control, had been watching Catherine, threatening Jonathan not with violence against himself, but against his pregnant wife. It seems your father wasn't content to let you handle the situation, Powell observed, her professional detachment failing to mask her distaste. Harrington looked stricken. I had no idea, he whispered. I swear to you both, I knew nothing about this. Charlotte wasn't sure what to believe. The evidence suggested that while Maxwell Harrington might not have directly betrayed his friend, his father had taken matters into his own hands, applying pressure that may have contributed to Jonathan Meyer's final desperate act. The USB drive might tell us more, Powell suggested. I'll have my team work on it immediately. As they gathered the contents of the box to depart, a bank attendant appeared at the door. Excuse me, Miss Meyer? There's a call for you at the front desk. The gentleman says it's urgent. Charlotte frowned. No one knew she was here except the people in this room. Did he give a name? Yes, ma'am, doctor. Elliot Lawrence. The name meant nothing to Charlotte, but she noticed both Harrington and her mother stiffen in recognition. Who is Elliot Lawrence, she asked. Jonathan's psychiatrist, Catherine answered, her voice barely audible. But that's impossible. He died years ago. Apparently not, Harrington said grimly. And the timing of his resurrection is unlikely to be coincidental. Charlotte's mind raced. He would have known my father's mental state, his fears, his accusations against you, and he would have been bound by doctor-patient confidentiality, Powell interjected. Unless ... single quotes, unless he had reason to believe Jonathan's paranoia wasn't paranoia at all, Charlotte finished. Unless he had evidence that someone really was threatening him. She headed for the door, only to find Harrington blocking her path. This could be a trap, he warned. We don't know who's on the other end of that call or what they want. I know what they want, Charlotte replied. The same thing I want, the truth, and I'm going to get it, with or without your blessing. Harrington studied her face for a long moment, seeming to recognize something familiar in her determination. Finally, he stepped aside. I'm coming with you, he said. It wasn't a request. As they approached the front desk, Charlotte felt as if she were walking into the climax of a story she hadn't known she was part of until now. The bank attendant handed her the phone with a polite smile, oblivious to the weight of the moment. This is Charlotte Meyer, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Ms. Meyer. The voice on the other end was elderly but clear, with a hint of an accent she couldn't place. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but subtlety is a luxury I can no longer afford. Your father was not paranoid, and Maxwell Harrington is not your friend. Meet me at the Bethesda Fountain in Central Park at noon if you want to know why your father really jumped. The line went dead before she could respond. Charlotte looked up to find Harrington watching her intently. What did he say? She hesitated only briefly before deciding on honesty. He wants to meet at the Bethesda Fountain at noon. He says he knows why my father really died. It's a setup, Harrington said immediately. We should involve security, maybe the police. No, Charlotte interrupted. No police, no security. This man knew my father, treated him during his darkest times. If he has information, I need to hear it. Then we go together, Harrington insisted. All of us is ... single quotes. Charlotte considered arguing, then nodded. Whatever game was being played, it was clear they were all pieces on the board, moved by hands they couldn't yet see. Better to face what was coming as a united front, even if their alliance was temporary and fragile. As they left the bank, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that somewhere in the crowded Manhattan streets, the architect of their current predicament was observing their every move, counting on them to follow the breadcrumbs to a destination of his choosing. For the first time, Charlotte understood the fear that might have driven her father to his final, desperate act. The sensation of being manipulated by unseen forces was terrifying, and she had only been experiencing it for hours, not the weeks or months Jonathan had endured. Whatever awaited them at the Bethesda Fountain, one thing was certain. The truth about her father's legacy was far darker and more complex than a simple contract dispute between former partners. It was a story of betrayal, manipulation, and possibly murder, one that had lain dormant for 28 years, waiting for the perfect moment to resurface. That moment, it seemed, had finally arrived. Central Park in late spring was a riot of green. The manicured lawns and flowering trees, a stark contrast to the concrete and glass canyons that surrounded it. The Bethesda Fountain, with its iconic angel statue rising above the water, bustled with the usual mix of tourists, joggers, and locals enjoying their lunch breaks. Charlotte, Catherine, and Harrington arrived 15 minutes early, positioning themselves on a bench with clear sight lines to all approaching paths. Powell had stayed behind to begin work on accessing the USB drive, promising to call the moment she had results. She'd also arranged for 2 discreet security personnel to maintain a perimeter around the meeting site, a concession Harrington had insisted on despite Charlotte's objections. How will we recognize him? Charlotte asked, scanning the crowd. I don't even know what Dr. Lawrence looks like. I do, Catherine said quietly. He was a kind man, gentle. He believed in your father when others had given up. Her gaze shifted briefly to Harrington. I didn't give up on Jonathan, Harrington said, his voice tight. I tried to protect what we'd built while getting him the help he needed. By having him involuntarily committed, Catherine's words carried a sting that surprised Charlotte. That's what broke him, Max. Not the illness, the betrayal. Charlotte turned to her mother in shock. You never told me that part. Because it wasn't relevant to the fiction we constructed for you. Catherine replied, her eyes still on Harrington. But we're past fiction now, aren't we? Harrington's jaw clenched. It was for his own safety. He was becoming erratic, dangerous. To your company, perhaps? Catherine interrupted. Not to himself or others. Not yet. He was hallucinating, Cat. Seeing conspiracy where there was none. Except now we know there was a conspiracy, Charlotte interjected. Your father was threatening mine. Surveilling my mother, Harrington fell silent, the weight of his father's actions sitting heavily on his shoulders. Before he could formulate a response, Catherine stiffened beside them. There he is, she said, nodding toward an elderly man making his way slowly along the path. He walked with a slight stoop, leaning on a carved wooden cane, but his gaze was sharp and alert beneath a shock of white hair. As he approached, Charlotte could see that his clothes, a tweed jacket despite the warm weather, pressed slacks, a bow tie belonged to a different era. Harrington rose to meet him, his expression a mask of professional cordiality that didn't reach his eyes. Dr. Lawrence, you're looking remarkably well for a dead man. The old man's laugh was surprisingly robust, Maxwell Harrington, still leading with aggression, I see. Some things never change. His accent, which Charlotte now recognized as Austrian, gave his words a lilting quality. He turned to Catherine, his expression softening. My dear Catherine, the years have been kinder to you than to me. Elliot, Catherine replied, her voice thick with emotion. We thought you were gone. Your practice closed, your apartment emptied. A necessary disappearance, Lawrence said, lowering himself onto the bench beside them with a soft grunt. After what happened to Jonathan, I realized I might be next if I didn't take precaution. Next for what? Charlotte asked, studying the man who had been her father's confidant. Lawrence regarded her with keen interest. You have his eyes, you know. The same intensity. He glanced at Harrington. I assume you haven't told her everything. We found the safety deposit box, Harrington replied. The journal, the settlement offer from my father, the surveillance photos. But the USB drive is still being analyzed. Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. Then you know part of it, but not the most important part. He turned to Charlotte. Your father wasn't just a brilliant engineer, Miss Meyer. He was also a man of principle, a dangerous quality in the world of corporate innovation. What do you mean? Lawrence's gaze drifted to the fountain, where water cascaded from the Angel's Base into the pool below. The quantum architecture that Harrington built his empire upon wasn't just a breakthrough in processing speed or efficiency. It was a skeleton key, a fundamental reconfiguration of how computational systems could interact with encryption protocols. Charlotte frowned, trying to follow. You mean like a password cracker? Much more sophisticated, Lawrence corrected. Jonathan theorized that his design, once fully realized, could potentially breach any encryption algorithm in existence. In the wrong hands, it could render all digital security obsolete. Harrington shifted uncomfortably. That was purely theoretical. The quantum architecture as implemented never had that capability. Because you modified it, Lawrence countered. After Jonathan's death, you altered key components, limited its potential, which was the responsible thing to do, he acknowledged with a slight nod. But the original design, the one Jonathan documented in his notes and on that USB drive, was far more powerful, far more dangerous. Charlotte was beginning to understand. So my father created something that could potentially bypass any security system in the world, and then became paranoid that someone was after him because of it? Not paranoid, Lawrence corrected. Aware. Jonathan realized too late the implications of what he'd created. He began to suspect that certain government agencies had learned of his work and wanted it for themselves, not the commercial version Harrington was developing, but the unrestricted skeleton key version. The NSA, Harrington said, his voice flat. Jonathan became convinced they were monitoring him, planning to steal his work or force him to develop it for them. And you dismissed it as delusion, Lawrence said. A convenient explanation for his increasing instability, because it was, Harrington insisted. Jonathan had stopped taking his medication. He was seeing patterns where none existed, attributing malevolence to ordinary events. It's a textbook symptom of his condition. Lawrence reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small envelope, which he handed to Charlotte. Inside was a faded black and white photograph showing two men in suits speaking with an older gentleman who bore a striking resemblance to Harrington. James Pierce, Maxwell's father, Lawrence explained, meeting with two men outside the psychiatric facility where Jonathan was being held. The man on the left is Richard Sullivan, then assistant director of the NSA's cryptanalysis division. Harrington stared at the photograph, his expression hardening. This proves nothing. My father knew many government officials. 3 days after this meeting, Jonathan was granted an unsupervised walk on the facility grounds. Lawrence continued as if Harrington hadn't spoken. That same day, he managed to escape despite supposedly being under constant observation. 2 days after that, he jumped from the roof of Harrington Technologies. The implications hung in the air, dark and suffocating. Charlotte looked from Lawrence to Harrington, trying to read the truth in their expressions. Are you suggesting my father was murdered? She finally asked. I'm suggesting, Lawrence said carefully, that the circumstances of Jonathan's death deserve far more scrutiny than they received at the time. Whether he jumped or was pushed, the pressure that drove him to that roof came from multiple sources. His illness, yes, but also very real external threats. Harrington's face had gone pale. My father would never have been party to murder. Perhaps not knowingly, Lawrence conceded, but he may have facilitated access to Jonathan by people who would stop at nothing to control that technology. The question you should be asking, Mr. Harrington, is why that same technology is suddenly of interest again, 28 years later. The Asahi merger, Charlotte realized. It's not just a business deal, is it? Lawrence smiled grimly. Asahi Quantum Technologies has made remarkable advances in quantum computing over the past decade. Combined with the original, unrestricted version of Jonathan's architecture, the skeleton key could finally be realized. Harrington finished, his voice barely above a whisper. A tense silence fell over the group, broken only by the splash of the fountain and the distant laughter of children. Charlotte felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting yet again, each new revelation reconfiguring her understanding of her father, his work, and his death. The USB drive, Catherine said suddenly. If it contains Jonathan's original designs, then it's incredibly valuable to certain parties, Lawrence nodded, and incredibly dangerous to others. Who sent the contract to Charlotte? Harrington demanded. Who orchestrated this entire situation? Lawrence leaned on his cane, pushing himself to his feet. That, Mr. Harrington, is the question that should keep you awake at night. He turned to Charlotte. Your father was a good man caught in circumstances beyond his control. He tried to protect his work, his family, and his principles. In the end, he could only choose one. As Lawrence took a step away from the bench, his body suddenly stiffened. His hand went to his chest, his face contorting in pain. The cane clattered to the ground as he stumbled forward. Charlotte lunged to catch him, easing him down onto the path as tourists scattered around them, some stopping to stare, others hurrying away from the unfolding medical emergency. "Dr. Lawrence!" she cried, cradling his head. "Someone call an ambulance?" Harrington was already on his phone, barking orders to his security team. Catherine knelt beside them, her medical training taking over as she checked Lawrence's pulse. "Heart attack," she murmured, beginning chest compressions. "Elliot, stay with us." Lawrence's eyes fluttered, focusing briefly on Charlotte. His hand clutched at his jacket pocket, then at her arm. "Trust no one," he whispered, his accent thickening with the effort. "The key ... not just the technology ... hereditary ... clause ... single quotes." His eyes rolled back, his body going limp in Charlotte's arms. Catherine continued compressions, her movements becoming more desperate as color drained from Lawrence's face. "Losing him," she said, her voice breaking. "Max, where's that ambulance?" But Charlotte knew with a sickening certainty that no ambulance would arrive in time. Dr. Elliot Lawrence, the last person who might have known the full truth about her father's final days, was slipping away before her eyes. In his last moments of consciousness, his hand had pressed something small and hard into her palm, a tiny metal object that she instinctively slipped into her pocket without examining, aware of the many eyes now watching them from all directions. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, but Lawrence's chest had gone still beneath Catherine's hand. The doctor who had faked his own death once before had now died for real, taking with him secrets that had remained buried for nearly 3 decades. Or had he? As security personnel formed a perimeter around them and park visitors gawked from a distance, Charlotte couldn't shake the suspicion that Lawrence's collapse had been too convenient, too perfectly timed. Had his heart given out naturally, or had someone ensured his silence just as he was beginning to reveal the truth? And what was the object now hidden in her pocket, pressed into her hand with Lawrence's dying breath? The foundations of Charlotte's world had been crumbling piece by piece since the moment she'd placed that contract beside Harrington's wine glass. Now, kneeling on the pathway beside a dead man while camera phones recorded the scene from every angle, she realized there was no going back to the life she had known before. Whatever game was being played, she was now a central piece on the board, and someone, somewhere, was several moves ahead. The aftermath of Dr. Lawrence's death unfolded like a choreographed dance. Harrington's security team established a perimeter, keeping onlookers at bay while EMTs confirmed what they already knew. Police arrived, took statements, and eventually allowed them to leave after Harrington made a few quiet phone calls. Throughout it all, Charlotte remained acutely aware of the small, hard object in her pocket, but resisted the urge to examine it under so many watchful eyes. By late afternoon, they had returned to Harrington's penthouse, where Powell awaited them with grim news of her own. "We've accessed the USB drive," she announced without preamble as they entered. "And it's ... problematic." "Define problematic," Harrington demanded, loosening his tie as he crossed to the bar to pour himself a drink. Powell glanced at Charlotte and Catherine, clearly reluctant to speak freely in front of them. "They stay," Harrington said, noting her hesitation. "Whatever this is, we're past the point of compartmentalization." Powell nodded once, all business. "The drive contains 2 sets of files. The first is a complete technical specification for the original quantum architecture, Jonathan's unaltered design. The second is a series of audio recordings." She paused. "Conversations between Jonathan Meyer and James Pierce." Harrington's hands stilled, the glass of scotch halfway to his lips. "My father? That's impossible. Jonathan and my father despised each other." "Apparently not always," Powell said, placing a slim laptop on the glass coffee table. "The timestamps indicate these were recorded in the 3 weeks before Jonathan's death." She pressed play, and the room filled with the sound of a younger James Pierce's voice, immediately recognizable by the same aristocratic inflection his son had inherited. "Asterisk, I understand your concerns, Jonathan, but you're being naive. This technology is too powerful to be controlled by the private sector. National security must take precedence." Asterisk, I didn't design it to be a weapon." Asterisk, came Jonathan's voice, tense and ragged with exhaustion. Asterisk, it was meant to advance computing, not to give the government a backdoor into every system on the planet. Asterisk, the NSA has assured me their interest is purely defensive. They need to stay ahead of our adversaries. Asterisk, and you believe them? Asterisk, Jonathan's bitter laugh echoed from the speakers. Asterisk, you're either lying or delusional, James. They'll weaponize it, they'll use it to spy on everyone, everywhere. I won't be responsible for that. Asterisk, you don't have a choice. Asterisk, James's voice hardened. Asterisk, this is bigger than you. Bigger than your principles. Sign the transfer agreement. Take the money. Walk away. Asterisk, and if I refuse? Asterisk, a pause, then James's voice lowered, now menacing. Asterisk, then I can't guarantee your family's safety, Jonathan. Catherine, your unborn child. There are people involved now who don't make empty threats. The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in the penthouse. Charlotte looked at Harrington, whose face had gone ashen. He threatened my father, she said quietly. Your father threatened mine. Explicitly. Harrington seemed unable to form words, staring at the laptop as if it were a venomous snake. Powell spoke into the silence. There are 5 more recordings, each progressively more confrontational. The final one was made the day before Jonathan was committed to the psychiatric facility. Catherine had sunk onto the sofa, her hands trembling slightly. I knew James was involved somehow, but I never imagined. She looked at Harrington with something between pity and accusation. Did you know, Max, any of it? No, Harrington whispered, finally finding his voice. I knew my father opposed the partnership, thought Jonathan was unstable, a liability, but this he drained his glass in one swallow. I never knew. Charlotte's mind was racing, connecting fragments of the story that was emerging. So my father realized the danger of his invention, refused to turn it over to the NSA, was threatened, then conveniently diagnosed as paranoid and committed, where he had a suspicious escape and subsequent suicide. She looked at Harrington. And you expect me to believe you weren't part of it? I wasn't, Harrington insisted, meeting her gaze directly. Jonathan was my friend before he was my partner. I would never have. He broke off, running a hand through his silver hair. I knew he was struggling. The paranoia seemed real. The accusations against me, against everyone, they were textbook symptoms of his condition. I thought I was helping him by arranging the commitment, while your father was actually making his paranoia come true, Charlotte said bitterly. It would appear so, Powell interjected, her tone professionally detached despite the bombshell she'd dropped. And that brings us to our current situation. These recordings, combined with the original specifications on the USB drive, would be extremely damaging if made public, not just to Harrington Global but potentially to national security. Is that a threat? Charlotte asked sharply. An observation, Powell countered. Whoever sent you that contract knows about these recordings. They know about your father's original, unrestricted design, and they timed this revelation precisely to disrupt the Asahi merger. She looked at Harrington. This isn't just corporate sabotage. This is something much bigger. Charlotte suddenly remembered the object in her pocket, making sure her body blocked the security cameras she knew must be monitoring the penthouse. She slipped her hand into her pocket and felt the outline of what seemed to be a small key, similar to the one that had opened the safety deposit box. We need to figure out who's behind this, Harrington said, moving to the window where the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Manhattan. Lawrence might have known, but he's beyond questioning now. His death was too convenient, Charlotte said. Heart attack just as he's about to reveal crucial information? I don't believe it for a second. You think he was murdered? Catherine asked, her voice barely audible. In broad daylight in front of dozens of witnesses? It's possible, Powell acknowledged. There are methods in traceable compounds that can trigger cardiac events indistinguishable from natural causes. If someone was following Lawrence, monitoring his movements, single quotes, the same someone who's been watching us, Charlotte finished, who arranged for me to work at Lucille, who sent the contract, who knew about the safety deposit box and the USB drive. Harrington turned from the window, his face hard with resolve. We need to get ahead of this. Powell, I want complete background checks on everyone involved with the Asahi merger negotiations. And I mean everyone, their executives, our board members, the investment bankers, the lawyers. Already underway, Powell replied, but it will take time. Time we may not have, Harrington muttered. The merger vote is in 11 days. Charlotte's mind was churning with questions, theories, and suspicions. There was an architect behind all of this, someone who had been planning for months, perhaps years, to bring these long-buried secrets to light at precisely this moment. But who stood to gain from it? The NSA wanting to prevent the merger because it might put the skeleton key technology in foreign hands? A rival company hoping to scuttle Harrington's deal? Someone with a personal vendetta against the Harrington family? Or someone else entirely? As the others continued discussing security measures and damage control, Charlotte excused herself to use the bathroom. Once alone, she finally extracted the key from her pocket and examined it. Unlike the safety deposit box key, this one was newer, with a small plastic tag attached bearing a simple label, STC-403. A hotel room? An apartment? Some other location Lawrence had prepared as a failsafe in case something happened to him. Charlotte's instincts told her that this key was crucial, that Lawrence had passed it to her with his dying breath because it led to something vital. But she also sensed that sharing this discovery with Harrington or Powell would be a mistake. Despite everything they'd learned, she still didn't know who she could trust. Lawrence's final words echoed in her mind. Trust no one. When she returned to the living room, a new tension filled the air. Powell was on the phone, her expression grave, while Harrington paced the length of the window, radiating barely contained fury. What's happening? Charlotte asked her mother, who sat rigid on the sofa. Catherine nodded toward Powell. Someone leaked the existence of the contract and the safety deposit box. It's already on financial news sites. Harrington Global's stock is dropping. Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. How could anyone know about the safety deposit box? We only found it this morning. Exactly, Harrington snapped, overhearing her question. Someone is feeding information to the press in real time. Someone close to it. Powell ended her call and turned to the group. It gets worse. The leak includes specific allegations about NSA involvement in Jonathan Myers' death, claiming that Harrington Technologies provided backdoor access to the quantum architecture for government surveillance program. That's not true, Harrington protested. We modified the design specifically to prevent that capability. Truth is irrelevant in the court of public opinion, Powell replied coldly. The damage is done. Our stock has fallen 18% in the last hour, and Asahi's board has called an emergency meeting. The walls were closing in. Charlotte glanced at her mother, whose face had gone pale. For Catherine, this wasn't just about corporate intrigue or billions of dollars. It was about the husband she had lost, the lies she had lived with, the life she had struggled to build in the shadow of tragedy. What do they want? Charlotte finally asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken. Whoever is behind this, what's their endgame? Money, most likely, Harrington said dismissively. Corporate extortion dressed up as justice for your father, but Charlotte wasn't convinced. This felt bigger than a simple shakedown. The precision of it, the timing, the layers of manipulation, this was personal. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. She opened it, her blood running cold as she read the message. Asterisk. The key leads to the truth. Come alone if you want to know who really killed your father. Sharing this message will have consequences. Asterisk. Attached was a photo, a surveillance shot taken through the window of Harrington's penthouse not 5 minutes early, showing all of them gathered in the living. Whoever had sent the message was watching them right now. Charlotte glanced up at the windows, the vast expanse of glass suddenly feeling like a vulnerability rather than a luxury. She slipped the phone back into her pocket without alerting the other. Whoever was orchestrating this macabre performance had just invited her to a private showing, and despite every rational instinct warning her of danger, Charlotte knew she would accept. The key burned in her pocket like a hot cola beacon pointing toward either answers or annihilation. Either way, she was done being a pawn in someone else's game. It was time to take a risk of her own. Escaping Harrington's penthouse proved surprisingly simple. The chaos of damage control created the perfect distraction. Powell coordinating with the PR, Harrington on endless calls with the board and Asahi executives, Catherine resting in one of the guest rooms after the emotional toll of the day. In the tumult, Charlotte slipped away, telling a distracted Harrington she needed fresh air and would be on the terrace. Instead, she took the service elevator to the parking garage where she hailed a rideshare from her phone, making sure to disable location sharing first. The key burned in her pocket, a physical manifestation of the choice she was making to trust strangers. Cryptic message over the relative safety of Harrington's protective orbit. But was she truly safe with Harrington? The question haunted her as the car merged into Manhattan traffic. The man had been her invisible benefactor for years, yes, but he had also committed her father to a psychiatric facility where, coincidentally or not, he had escaped only to die days later. And while Harrington might not have known about his father's threats and NSA connections, he had still profited immensely from her father's genius, while Charlotte and Catherine struggled. STC- 403. The label on the key had to refer to CT Claire Hotel, a modest establishment in the garment district that had somehow survived decades of gentrification. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would look for. A meeting of international significance, which was precisely why it was perfect. As the car approached the hotel, Charlotte scanned the surrounding blocks for any sign of surveillance. The area bustled with the usual mix of tourists and locals, fashion industry workers hurrying between showrooms, delivery people navigating crowded sidewalks. Anyone could be watching or no one. The uncertainty was paralyzing. The St. Clair's lobby was a faded remnant of mid-century design, brass fixtures dulled with age, patterned carpet worn thin in high-traffic areas. The elderly clerk barely looked up as Charlotte walked past, heading directly for the elevators as if she belonged there. Room 403 was at the end of a dimly lit hallway on the 4th floor. Charlotte stood before the door, key in hand, heart hammering against her ribs. There was still time to turn back, to return to Harrington's penthouse and the relative security of his resources and protection. But the truth about her father lay on the other side of this door. The real truth, not the sanitized version she'd been fed her entire life. Taking a deep breath, she inserted the key and turned it. The room was small, with heavy curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. A musty scent hung in the air, the smell of a space long undisturbed. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Charlotte made out a single bed, a desk with an old desktop computer, and walls covered in papers, photographs, and maps connected by red string, the kind of evidence board depicted in countless conspiracy thrillers, except this one was real. She reached for the light switch, then hesitated, remembering the surveillance photo in the text message. Instead, she used her phone's flashlight to examine the room more carefully. The evidence board told a chronicle of Jonathan Myers' final weeks, meticulously documented and analyzed. News clippings about Harrington Technologies, personnel files of NSA officials, surveillance photos of meetings between James Pierce and men in dark suits. At the center was a photograph of her father, younger than she had ever seen him, with intense eyes that matched her own, standing beside a smiling Maxwell Harrington as they held up what appeared to be an award or plaque. On the desk sat a sealed envelope with her name written on it in an elegant, precise hand that she recognized from Lawrence's medical notes in the safety deposit box. Beside it was a laptop, far newer than the desktop computer, with a post-it note stuck to the closed lid. Password: Phoenix 1989. Charlotte's hand trembled as she opened the envelope. Asterisk, my dear Charlotte. Asterisk, asterisk. If you are reading this, then I have either contacted you successfully about the truth of your father's work, or I am dead, the latter being the more likely outcome given the forces arrayed against us. Asterisk. Asterisk, I have maintained this room for 28 years, waiting for the right moment to reveal what I know. That moment has arrived with the Asahi merger, which threatens to revive the skeleton key your father feared would be weaponized. Asterisk. Asterisk, there are things you must understand about Jonathan. His illness was real, the bipolar disorder, the potential for paranoia during manic episodes, but his fears about the NSA's interest in his work were entirely justified. In our sessions, he shared his growing concerns about James Pierce's connections to government intelligence agencies. I initially dismissed these as symptomatic of his condition until James Pierce himself approached me. Asterisk. Asterisk, Pierce offered me a substantial sum to report on Jonathan's mental state and to support the case for involuntary commitment. When I refused, the threats began subtle at first, then explicit. My practice was investigated by the medical board. My taxes were audited. My visa status was questioned. Still, I refused. Asterisk, asterisk, after Jonathan's death, I knew I would be next if I didn't disappear. I staged my own demise, established a new identity, and began gathering evidence. What I found confirms your father's worst. Asterisk, asterisk. You will find everything I've assembled over nearly 3 decades, proof that your father was coerced, that his suicide was high. Asterisk, but most critically, you will find the identity of the person who orchestrated it, all the puppet master whose strings still manipulate events today. Asterisk. Asterisk trusts no one, Charlotte. Not Harrington, not Powell, not even those who claim to be helping you uncover the truth. Everyone has an agenda in this game. Asterisk, asterisk, with deepest regret for my part in your father's tragedy. Asterisk, asterisk, Elliot Lawrence. Asterisk, Charlotte sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the letter clutched in her hand. Lawrence had been preparing for this moment for decades, gathering evidence, waiting for the precise alignment of circumstances that would make the truth matter again. She opened the laptop and entered the password. The screen illuminated with a desktop containing dozens of meticulously organized folders. One was labeled simply Architect and was marked with a red exclamation point. She clicked on it. Inside was a single document, a comprehensive profile of a man named Victor Keller. The name meant nothing to her, but as she scrolled through the file, connections began to emerge. Keller had been a senior analyst at the NSA's cryptanalysis division in the late 1980s, reporting directly to Richard Sullivan, the man pictured with James Pierce outside Jonathan's psychiatric facility. Later, he had moved to the private sector, founding a cybersecurity firm that specialized in government contract. Most recently, he had joined the board of Asahi Quantum Technologies. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Keller had been involved from the beginning, first as an NSA operative interested in Jonathan's technology, then as a private contractor developing similar systems, and now as a board member of the company seeking to merge with Harrington Global. He had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to orchestrate the current crisis. But why now? Why wait 28 years to expose the truth? The answer lay in another folder labeled Quantum Leap. Inside were technical analyses of Asahi's recent quantum computing breakthroughs. Advances that, when combined with Jonathan's original design, could finally realize the skeleton key he had feared. The merger wasn't just a business deal, it was the culmination of a decades-long strategy to bring together the 2 pieces of technology needed to create the ultimate surveillance tool. Charlotte's phone buzzed, a text from her mother. Asterisk, where are you? Max is worried. Please call. Asterisk, she ignored it, continuing to explore the laptop's contents. In a folder marked Surveillance, she found something that made her blood run cold: recent photographs of herself at work in Lucille, at her apartment, shopping with her mother. Whoever had been watching her hadn't just started when she found the contract. They had been monitoring her for months. The realization struck her like a physical blow. She wasn't the one who had set these events in motion by showing Harrington the contract. She had been deliberately placed in his path, a pawn positioned on the board by a grandmaster who had been playing a much longer game. Another folder caught her eye. Inside Man. She clicked on it, her hands shaking slightly. Inside was a single photograph taken with a telephoto lens through an office window. It showed Diane Powell, Harrington's trusted legal counsel, meeting with Victor Keller in what appeared to be a restaurant private dining room. The date stamp was 3 weeks ago, just before the contract had arrived in the mail. Powell was the leak, the inside source feeding information in real time, the architect's agent within Harrington's inner circle. Charlotte's mind raced. Powell had been present for every revelation, every discussion of strategy. She knew about the safety deposit box, the USB drive, Lawrence's appearance and death. She had positioned herself as Harrington's protector while systematically undermining him. The sound of a key in the lock froze Charlotte in place. Someone else had access to the room, someone who might be working with Lawrence or hunting. She closed the laptop and slid it under the bed, then looked frantically for a hiding place or weapon. The door began to open. "Charlotte!" Catherine Meyer stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thank God. I've been worried sick. Mom? How did you find me?" Catherine stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "The key around my neck wasn't the only one I've been carrying all these years." She held up a key identical to the one Lawrence had given Charlotte. "I've known about this place since Elliot set it up. I've never come here before today, but I always kept the key, just in case." Charlotte stared at her mother, struggling to reconcile this new information with everything else she'd learned. "You knew about Lawrence's investigation all this time?" "Not the details," Catherine said, moving further into the room and taking in the evidence board with a pained expression. "Just that he was gathering information about what really happened to Jonathan. He contacted me once about 5 years after your father died to give me the key. Said it was insurance for both of us. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid," Catherine admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "Afraid of the truth, afraid of what it might do to you, to us. As long as we stayed quiet, stayed small, we were safe." Charlotte felt a surge of anger. Safe, but struggling. Living a lie while Harrington built an empire on Dad's work. "It wasn't that simple," Catherine said. "Nothing about this ever was." She glanced at the laptop, partially visible under the bed. "What have you found?" Charlotte hesitated, Lawrence's warning echoing in her mind. Asterisk, trust no one asterisk. But this was her mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her, who had carried the burden of these secrets for decades. "Powell is working with someone named Victor Keller," she said finally. "He's ex-NSA now on Asahi's board. They're the ones behind everything, the contract, the leaks, all of it." Catherine paled. "Victor Keller, are you sure?" "Yes. Do you know him?" "Not personally, but I remember the name." Catherine's hand went to her throat, a nervous habit from years past. "Jonathan mentioned him in those final weeks. Said Keller was the one who truly understood what the quantum architecture could do, who saw its full potential as a weapon. A piece of the puzzle that had been missing suddenly appeared. So Keller was the true believer, the one who wanted Dad's original design not just for surveillance but as an offensive weapon. And now he's orchestrated this whole situation to get it," Catherine concluded. "The merger, the contract, everything. It's all to force the original design into the open where he can finally acquire it." Charlotte stood, grabbing the laptop from under the bed. "We need to get this to Harrington. Whatever his father did, whatever his role was in all this, he needs to know that Powell is betraying him." Catherine nodded, reaching for the door, then froze as voices became audible in the hallway outside. Male voices speaking in low, urgent tones. "Is there another way out?" Charlotte whispered. Catherine shook her head, her face tight with fear. "Just the fire escape, but the window is painted shut. I checked years ago when Elliot first gave me the key. They were trapped." Charlotte shoved the laptop into her bag along with Lawrence's letter, looking around desperately for anything that might serve as a weapon. The voices outside grew closer, stopping just outside the door. A key slid into the lock. Charlotte met her mother's eyes, seeing in them a fierce, protective love that transcended fear. Whatever came through that door, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else in their lives. The door swung open. Maxwell Harrington stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, his security team, not the faceless government agents Charlotte had feared. His expression flickered from relief fusion to anger as he took in the evidence-covered walls, the laptop in Charlotte's bag, and Catherine's guilty stance. "I see I'm late to the party," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Would either of you care to explain why you disappeared from my penthouse to meet in what appears to be a conspiracy theorist's dream den? How did you find us?" Charlotte demanded, clutching her bag tighter. "Your mother isn't as subtle as she thinks." When she slipped away after receiving a text, "I had my security team track her phone." Harrington stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the evidence board. "Lawrence's work, I presume?" Catherine moved protectively toward Charlotte. "Max, this isn't what you think." "No? Because it looks very much like you've both been working with Lawrence all along, orchestrating this entire situation." His eyes narrowed as he focused on a photograph of his father meeting with NSA officials. "Was any of it real, Kat? Your surprise at the contract? Your shock at the recordings? Or was it all an act to manipulate me?" "We weren't involved," Charlotte insisted. "Lawrence has been gathering evidence for decades, but he never contacted us until now. And we've discovered something you need to know, that Powell is working with someone named Victor Keller," Harrington interrupted. "Former NSA, now on Asahi's board?" "Yes, we're aware." Charlotte blinked in surprise. "How did you find out?" "Because Powell isn't as clever as she thinks. When the leaks started appearing with information only she could have known, it wasn't difficult to monitor her communications." Harrington's expression was granite. "She's been under surveillance since we left the bank this morning. We know about her meeting with Keller scheduled for tonight. The revelation left Charlotte momentarily speechless. She had underestimated Harrington again, his resources, his vigilance, his ruthlessness. Then you know what they're planning, she said. The merger isn't just about business. It's about finally creating the skeleton key my father feared, combining his original design with Asahi's quantum computing advancements. Of course it is, Harrington replied, impatience edging his tone. Why do you think I've been fighting to control the narrative? To protect the merger? If Asahi pulls out because of these revelations, Keller will find another way to acquire the technology. At least with me involved, I can ensure the safeguards remain in place. Safeguards that your father and the NSA worked to circumvent 28 years ago, Charlotte countered. My father is not me, Harrington snapped, a flash of genuine anger breaking through his controlled exterior. Whatever he did, and I'm still processing the extent of his involvement. I've spent my career building systems with ethical constraints. The modified architecture I developed after Jonathan's death specifically limited the capabilities he feared would be weaponized. Charlotte hesitated, caught between distrust and a growing sense that Harrington might genuinely be on the right side of this particular battle, even if his hands weren't entirely clean. The USB drive, she said suddenly. Has your team finished analyzing it? Harrington's expression shifted subtly. Yes, the original design is even more powerful than we realized. In the wrong hands, in Keller's hands, Catherine interjected. In anyone's hands, Harrington corrected. It could render all existing encryption obsolete overnight. Banking systems, power grids, nuclear launch codes, nothing would be secure. And Keller wants to weaponize it. Charlotte concluded, just like he wanted to 28 years ago when my father refused to cooperate. Precisely. Harrington turned to one of his security men. Secure the perimeter. No one enters or leaves this floor without my knowledge. The man nodded and stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Harrington approached the evidence board, studying the red strings connecting photographs and documents. Lawrence was more thorough than I gave him credit for. He traced it all back to Keller. He believed my father was murdered, Charlotte said, watching Harrington's reaction carefully. That his suicide was staged. A shadow crossed Harrington's face. The evidence is concerning. The circumstances of his escape from the facility, the timing of his access to the Harrington Technologies building, despite heightened security, it was all too convenient. For Keller and your father, Charlotte pressed. Yes, the admission seemed to pain him, but I swear to you, I knew nothing about it. Jonathan was my friend before he was my partner. I would never have. But you profited from it, Charlotte couldn't help saying. Built an empire on his work while we struggled, I told. I tried to help, Harrington replied, frustration evident. Catherine refused anything that wasn't for you directly, and I kept my promise to look after you both in my own way. Catherine laid a hand on her daughter's arm. It's true, Charlotte. Max offered much more, but I couldn't accept it. Not after what happened to your father. My pride, my anger wouldn't allow it. Charlotte absorbed this. Another piece of the complex puzzle of her life sliding into place. Before she could respond, Harrington's phone rang. He answered, his expression darkening as he listened. When? He demanded. Who else knows? He listened for another moment. Lock it down. No one in or out. We're on our way. He ended the call, turning to Charlotte and Catherine with grim urgency. Powell's moved up her timeline. She accessed the secure server containing the USB drive data 10 minutes ago and copied everything. She's meeting Keller in 30 minutes, not tonight as we thought. Can't you stop her? Have her arrested? Charlotte asked. On what charges? She has legitimate access to those files as chief legal officer, and we have no proof of conspiracy yet, just circumstantial evidence. Harrington ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. By the time we could obtain warrants, it would be too late. The data would be in Keller's hands. Charlotte's mind raced, so we need to intercept her before the handoff. Where's the meeting? The Bowery Hotel bar. Public enough to avoid suspicion, private enough for a discreet exchange. Harrington was already moving toward the door. My security team will handle it. You two should. We're coming with you, Charlotte interrupted. There was no room for debate in her tone. I've been a pawn in this game long enough. I want to see it through. Harrington studied her for a moment, something like respect flickering in his eyes. You're as stubborn as your father. Is that a compliment or a criticism? Both, he admitted, with the ghost of a smile. Let's go. The journey to the Bowery Hotel was tense and silent. Harrington coordinated with his security team via text, his fingers moving rapidly over his phone screen as he arranged the interception. Charlotte kept the laptop bag close, unwilling to let the evidence out of her sight, despite Harrington's offer to secure it. As their car navigated through early evening traffic, Charlotte felt a strange calm settling over her. After 28 years of lies and half-truths, the full story of her father's life and death was finally emerging. Whatever happened tonight, she would no longer live in the shadow of secrets. What will you do with Powell? She asked as they neared their destination. Get the data back first and foremost, Harrington replied without looking up from his phone. After that, ... She'll never work in the industry again. I'll make sure of it. And Keller? At this, Harrington did look up, his eyes cold. Victor Keller has spent nearly 3 decades trying to weaponize your father's work. He was likely complicit in Jonathan's death. He orchestrated this entire situation to force the original design into the open where he could acquire it. He paused. I have enemies in high places, Charlotte, but I also have friends. Keller will find his government connections suddenly unreceptive, his contracts under scrutiny, His finances investigated. That's it? Charlotte couldn't hide her disappointment. After everything he's done? Justice and revenge are different beasts, Harrington said quietly. We may not be able to prove Keller's involvement in your father's death, not legally, but we can ensure he never gets his hands on the skeleton key. That's the true justice Jonathan would have wanted. Catherine, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. He's right, Charlotte. Jonathan cared more about protecting the world from his creation than punishing those who wronged him. She took her daughter's hand. That's why he jumped. He believed destroying himself was the only way to keep the original design from being weaponized. The revelation struck Charlotte like a physical blow. You think his suicide was real? Not staged. I think, Catherine said carefully, that when faced with an impossible choice between his principles and his life, Jonathan chose his principles. Whether someone physically pushed him from that roof or not, the responsibility lies with those who drove him to that desperate point. The car pulled to a stop half a block from the Bowery Hotel. Through the tinted windows, Charlotte could see the warm glow of the hotel's entrance. Doormen in crisp uniforms assisting guests from taxis. Powell arrived 5 minutes ago, Harrington reported, reading a text. She's at the bar, waiting. No sign of Keller yet. He turned to Charlotte and Catherine, his expression grave. This is your last chance to stay in the car. What happens next could be unpredictable. Charlotte met his gaze steadily. I've spent my entire life not knowing the truth about my father. I'm done hiding from it. She reached for the door handle. Let's finish this. As they approached the hotel entrance, Charlotte felt as if she were walking into the final act of a play that had begun before she was born. The puppet master who had manipulated their lives for decades was about to take the stage, and this time, she would be ready for it. The Bowery Hotel's bar was a study in calculated nostalgia, dark wood paneling, leather club chairs, and vintage lighting fixtures that cast a warm amber glow over its well-heeled clientele. Charlotte followed Harrington through the entrance, Catherine close behind them, while security personnel discreetly positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the space. Diane Powell sat alone at a corner table, a glass of white wine untouched before her, her attention fixed on her phone. She didn't notice their approach until Harrington's shadow fell across the table. Waiting for someone, Diane? He asked, his voice deceptively casual. Powell's head snapped up, her composed expression faltering for just a fraction of a second before her professional mask slid back into place. Maxwell, what an unexpected surprise, Single quotes. Her eyes moved to Charlotte and Catherine, narrowing slightly, and with company no less. Skip the performance, Harrington said, sliding into the chair opposite her. We know about Keller. We know about the data you stole. It's over. Single quotes. Powell's laugh was soft, almost pitying. Oh, Max. Nothing is over. It's barely begun. She glanced at her watch. And Victor will be here any minute. Wouldn't you like to meet the man who's been orchestrating this little drama? I'm sure he'd be fascinated to meet Jonathan Meyer's daughter face to face. Charlotte felt a chill at the casual way Powell mentioned her father. Why? She demanded, leaning forward. Why help Keller after all these years of loyalty to Harrington? Loyalty? Powell smiled thinly. I've been loyal to one thing only: the advancement of this technology to its full potential. Max has been deliberately hobbling it for decades, terrified of what it might become. She turned to Harrington. You've been a coward, Max. Always hiding behind ethical concerns, artificial limitations, safeguards. Do you have any idea what we could achieve without those constraints? I know exactly what could be achieved, Harrington replied, his voice hard. The complete collapse of digital privacy, absolute surveillance. At the end of secure communication. Progress requires sacrifice, Powell countered. The world is changing. China, Russia, they're developing similar technologies without your precious moral hand-wringing. We can either lead this revolution or be crushed by it. Charlotte studied the woman who had so convincingly played the role of Harrington's trusted advisor while betraying him all along. And my father? Was his death just another necessary sacrifice for progress? Powell's eyes met hers, cold and assessing. Your father was brilliant but naive. He created something revolutionary, then balked at its implications. Men like that, visionaries who lack the courage to see their vision fulfilled, they're the true tragedy. You didn't answer my question, Charlotte pressed. Because she doesn't know the answer, came a new voice from behind them. Charlotte turned to see a tall, lean man with silver hair and piercing gray eyes approaching the table. Despite being in his 70s, he moved with the precision and confidence of someone half his age. His tailored suit spoke of wealth, but it was the intelligence radiating from his gaze that commanded attention. Victor, Powell acknowledged, relief evident in her tone. Diane, Keller nodded, then turned his attention to Harrington. Maxwell, it's been too long. Harrington stood slowly, his posture tense. Not nearly long enough, Victor. Keller smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. And this must be Jonathan's daughter. Charlotte, isn't it? The resemblance is remarkable. His gaze shifted to Catherine Meyer. Still as beautiful as when we first met, all those years ago. Charlotte felt her mother stiffen beside her. You never met my mother, didn't I? Keller raised an eyebrow. September 1988, at the Harrington Technologies holiday party. Jonathan was so proud. introducing his pregnant wife to everyone. His smile faded. It was the last time I saw him truly happy. Before the paranoia set in, before he turned against his own creation, two of Harrington's security personnel had positioned themselves behind Keller, but he seemed utterly unconcerned by their presence. "I assume your men are here to recover the data Diane acquired," Keller said to Harrington, settling into a chair uninvited. "You should know it's already been transmitted to secure servers. What she carries is merely a copy." Harrington's jaw tightened. "Then you should also know that the data is encrypted. Without the key that only you possess," Keller interrupted. "Yes, that would be problematic if it were true." He turned to Charlotte, his expression almost gentle. "Your father built a backdoor into his encryption, did you know that? A secondary key linked to a passphrase that only he knew." Charlotte felt as if the floor were shifting beneath her. "You're lying." "Am I?" Keller withdrew a small notebook from his inner pocket identical to the one they'd found in the safety deposit box. "Jonathan's personal journal from the facility. The original, not the sanitized version he left for you to find." He flipped it open, revealing pages of increasingly frantic handwriting. His last entry, the night before he escaped, contains the passphrase, hidden in plain sight, in a code only I recognize. "How did you get that?" Catherine demanded, her voice shaking. "I visited him, of course," Keller replied, as if it were obvious. "We had a long talk about the future of his work, about the protection of his family." His eyes hardened. "About the choices he needed to make. You threatened him," Charlotte realized, "like James Pierce did." "I offered him clarity," Keller corrected. "Jonathan was lost in his illness, unable to see the bigger picture. I simply helped him understand the inevitable outcome of his situation." Harrington's voice was dangerously quiet. "You drove him to his death." "No, Max. You did." Keller's gaze was unflinching. "You committed him. You betrayed his trust. You chose your father's vision over your friend's welfare. I merely presented him with the reality you had created." A tense silence fell over the table. Charlotte's mind was racing, connecting fragments of the story into a cohesive, horrifying whole. Her father hadn't been murdered, not in the conventional sense. He had been methodically cornered, his illness exploited, his options systematically eliminated until death seemed like the only choice that would protect both his family and his principles. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Why orchestrate all this now after 28 years? Because now is when it matters," Keller replied simply. "The Asahi merger represents the final piece of the puzzle, quantum computing power sufficient to fully realize your father's original design, the skeleton key becoming operational at last." He leaned forward. "But there's another reason, one closer to your interests, the hereditary clause in your father's contract with Harrington." Charlotte frowned. "What about it?" "It doesn't just apply to profits derived from the commercialized version of the architecture," Keller explained. "It applies to all applications of the technology, including classified government implementations that have been running in the shadows for decades." Harrington's expression confirmed the truth of this revelation. "You knew," Charlotte accused him. "You knew the government was using versions of my father's technology all along." "Limited versions," Harrington defended. "Strictly controlled. Part of my agreement with certain agencies was that the original unrestricted design would never be implemented. That was the compromise, allow regulated use of modified systems in exchange for keeping the skeleton key buried forever. A compromise that has outlived its usefulness," Keller interjected. "The world has changed, Maxwell. The threats we face require more powerful tools." "And what does any of this have to do with me?" Charlotte demanded. Keller smiled. A genuine expression this time. "Everything. You are Jonathan Meyer's heir. Under the terms of that contract, you have claimed not only to Harrington's commercial profits, but to control over how the technology is implemented in classified programs." He leaned back in his chair. "With your cooperation, we can finally release your father's creation from the artificial constraints Maxwell has placed upon it." "My cooperation?" Charlotte echoed. "A simple legal agreement. You assign your rights under the contract to my consortium. In exchange, you receive not just the $22 billion Diane mentioned earlier, but nearly twice that amount from previously undisclosed applications. The enormity of the offer, over $40 billion, hung in the air. But Charlotte wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about what her father had sacrificed to keep his creation from becoming the very weapon Keller now proposed to build. "You think I can be bought?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Buy would betray everything my father died to protect." "I think you're practical," Keller replied. "And I think you understand that this technology will be fully realized with or without your blessing. The question is whether you want to shape its implementation or be sidelined entirely." Powell leaned forward. "The choice isn't between preventing the skeleton key or allowing it, Charlotte. That decision has already been made by powers beyond any of us. The choice is whether you want a seat at the table when it happens." Charlotte felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Her father had faced a similar choice 28 years ago and had chosen death over complicity. What would he want her to do now when the stakes were even higher? Harrington watched her intently, saying nothing, but his eyes conveyed a clear message. Whatever she decided, he would support her. This was her battle now, her legacy to accept or reject. "If I refuse?" she asked Keller. His smile remained, but his eyes grew cold. "Then we proceed without you. The Asahi merger is delayed, not derailed. Powell has the data. I have the passphrase. Your leverage in Harrington's diminishes by the hour." Charlotte glanced at her mother, drawing strength from Catherine's steady gaze. Then she looked back at Keller. the man who had helped drive her father to his death, who had orchestrated the elaborate chess game that had brought them all to this moment. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "Of course." Keller stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, events will progress with or without your participation." He nodded to Powell, who rose to join him. "A pleasure meeting you at last, Charlotte. Whatever you decide, know that your father's legacy will finally be fulfilled." As they turned to leave, Charlotte called after him. "One last question. The contract, who sent it to me?" Keller paused, looking back with a cryptic smile. "Who do you think?" And then they were gone, slipping past Harrington's security personnel with the confidence of people who knew they couldn't be touched, not without creating a scene that would attract precisely the kind of attention this clandestine meeting was designed to avoid. Charlotte turned to Harrington, her mind made up. "I need to see it." "See what, everything?" "The full implementation of my father's original design. The classified application, the modifications you made. I need to understand exactly what Keller wants to unleash on the world." Harrington hesitated, then nodded. "It's time you knew the whole truth. The heart of Harrington Global's empire lay 50 floors beneath the gleaming tower that bore its name." Charlotte followed Harrington into the elevator as Catherine waited above with security, her mother's choice, not wanting to see the technology that had cost her husband his life. "The quantum architecture has evolved over 3 decades, Harrington explained as they descended. "What you're about to see is the current iteration, far more advanced than what your father and I originally designed, but still constrained by the same ethical guardrails." The elevator doors opened to reveal a vast space filled with humming servers, their blue lights pulsing in hypnotic rhythm. At the center stood a glass enclosure containing what appeared to be a relatively modest black cube, roughly the size of a small refrigerator. "That's it?" Charlotte asked, somehow expecting something more imposing for a system with such destructive potential. "The physical footprint of quantum systems is deceptive," Harrington replied, leading her toward the enclosure. "What matters is what happens inside." He placed his palm on a biometric scanner, and the glass door slid open. Inside, he guided her to a workstation with multiple displays. "This terminal is isolated from all networks. What I'm about to show you cannot leave this room." His fingers moved rapidly over the keyboard, entering a complex series of commands. "This is your father's original, unmodified architecture. We keep it sequestered, running simulations but never connected to outside systems." The screens filled with cascading data, mathematical formulas and system architecture schematics that Charlotte could barely comprehend. But even to her untrained eye, there was an elegant beauty to the design, a brilliant simplicity that reminded her of the mathematical puzzles she'd loved as a child. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It is," Harrington agreed, a note of reverence in his voice. "Your father saw patterns that no one else could see, connections that seemed impossible until he revealed them." His expression darkened. "But beauty can be dangerous. Watch." He entered another command and a simulation began running on the central screen. It showed a visualization of encryption systems represented as complex geometric structures being systematically unraveled by invisible forces, their defenses falling like dominoes. "This is what the skeleton key does," Harrington explained. "It doesn't just break encryption, it renders the very concept obsolete. Any system, any code, any protection becomes transparent. Nothing is secure. Nothing is private." Charlotte watched in growing horror as the simulation showed critical infrastructure systems, power grids, water treatment facilities, air traffic control all falling to the skeleton key's relentless assault. "In the wrong hands, this could destroy civilization as we know it," Harrington continued. "Not with bombs or bullets, but with chaos. Imagine every bank account simultaneously accessible, every classified system exposed, every autonomous vehicle hackable. The collapse would be swift and total." "And the NSA wanted this?" Charlotte asked, unable to tear her eyes from the simulation. "Parts of it," Harrington said carefully, "under controlled conditions. What Keller wants is different. Visions a world where this power exists without constraints, where whoever controls the skeleton key controls everything." He switched screens, showing her a different architecture similar to the original but with key components altered or removed. "Is what I implemented after your father died. The commercialized version. It maintains the quantum processing advantages but eliminates the universal decryption capability." "And the government versions?" Harrington hesitated before typing another command. "There are 3 classified implementations, each with specific limitations. None has the full capability of the original design." The screen displayed 3 distinct variations, each tailored for specific intelligence applications. Charlotte studied them, understanding now why Keller had said her inheritance was worth nearly twice what Powell had initially calculated. "Did my father know?" she asked quietly. "About the government applications?" "No," Harrington admitted. "Those came later, after his death. Part of the compromise I mentioned, allowing limited use to prevent anyone from pursuing the unrestricted version." Charlotte turned to him, seeing not the billionaire tycoon but the young engineer who had once been her father's friend and partner. "You've been protecting his legacy all along." "In your own way." "I've tried," Harrington said, his voice rough with emotion. "Jonathan was right about the dangers. I didn't see it then, was too caught up in the potential, the ambition. But after he died, after I understood what my father and Keller had done, ... single quotes, he trailed off. I couldn't bring him back, but I could honor what he died for." Charlotte nodded, a decision crystallizing in her mind. mind. I know what I need to do. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the spring sunlight glinting off the glass facades of Manhattan's skyscrapers. Charlotte stood in Harrington's penthouse, gazing out at the city while they waited for Keller's arrival. She had spent the night reviewing Lawrence's evidence, the recordings from the USB drive, and the technical documentation of her father's creation. By morning, her path was clear. When Keller arrived, Powell at his side, his confident smile suggested he already knew her answer. They settled in the living room, the morning light casting long shadows across the polished floor. "Have you made your decision, Ms. Meyer?" Keller asked, declining Harrington's offer of coffee. "I have," Charlotte replied, her voice steady. "But first, I'd like to understand exactly what you're planning. The full implementation of my father's design, what would you do with it?" Keller studied her for a moment, then seemed to decide honesty was the best approach. The skeleton key would initially be deployed for national security applications, critical infrastructure protection, counterterrorism, cyber defense against hostile nations. And after that, strategic applications. Keller continued smoothly, ensuring American digital superiority in an increasingly hostile world. The ability to monitor potential threats before they materialize. Universal surveillance, Charlotte translated. "The very thing my father feared." "Your father was an idealist," Keller countered. "The world has changed. We face existential threats he couldn't have imagined." Charlotte nodded as if considering his words. "And my role in all this?" "Advisory," Keller said. "Your voice would be heard in determining how the technology is implemented, along with, of course, the financial compensation we discussed." Charlotte reached into her bag and withdrew a document, the original contract between her father and Harrington. "This agreement gives me control over all applications of my father's design, correct?" "That's our understanding, yes." "Then my answer is this." She placed the contract on the table between them. "I'm exercising my right under this agreement to permanently restrict the implementation of the original, unrestricted architecture. As of this moment, I am directing Harrington Global to destroy all copies of my father's original design, and to continue developing only the limited versions currently in operation." Single quotes. Keller's smile froze, then slowly faded. "You can't be serious." "Completely serious," Charlotte replied. "Furthermore, I've spent the night preparing this." She placed a second document beside the first, a legally binding amendment to the original contract, explicitly prohibiting any reconstruction or implementation of the unrestricted skeleton key technology. "It's already been filed with multiple law firms with instructions to release it publicly if anything happens to me. My mother or Maxwell Harrington." Powell leaned forward, her expression incredulous. "You're turning down $40 billion to preserve your father's outdated ethical stance?" "I'm honoring his legacy," Charlotte corrected, "and ensuring his sacrifice wasn't in vain." Keller's mask of civility slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "This is a temporary setback at best. The technology will be developed with or without your approval. You're simply removing yourself from having any influence over the process." "No," Harrington interjected. "She's ensuring that if anyone, including you, Victor, attempts to develop the unrestricted architecture, they'll be doing so in full public view, with all the scrutiny that entails." He smiled thinly. "Your consortium prefers to operate in the shadows. Charlotte has just shone a spotlight on your entire operation." Keller stood abruptly. "This isn't over for today." "It is," Charlotte replied, rising to meet his gaze. "My father once faced the same choice you've given me, principle or profit, humanity or power. He chose principle, even at the cost of his life. Did you really think his daughter would choose differently?" After Keller and Powell departed, the former seething, the latter already on her phone navigating her suddenly precarious position, Catherine embraced her daughter. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. Charlotte looked to Harrington, who stood by the window watching Keller's car pull away from the curb. "What happens now?" he said, turning to face her. "We rebuild. Keller will regroup, find another approach. Powell will be replaced. The Asahi merger will proceed, but with new safeguards in place." He paused. "And you will take your rightful place in the company your father helped create." "What does that mean?" "It means," Harrington said, "that Jonathan Meyer's name will finally appear alongside mine as the co-founder of what became Harrington Global. It means your seat on the board will ensure his ethical vision continues to guide our work. And it means your share of the legitimate profits from both commercial and approved government applications will be properly acknowledged and paid." Charlotte felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, not just the immediate crisis averted, but the decades of secrets and lies finally cleared away. "And my father's full story will be told," Harrington promised. "Not every detail, some must remain classified for legitimate security, but his brilliance, principles, his role in creating the technology that changed the world, all of it will be known." As the morning sun climbed higher, bathing the penthouse in golden light, Charlotte thought of the moment that had started it all, a waitress recognizing a signature, a billionaire dropping a glass in shock, a single moment that had shattered the careful fiction surrounding her life and revealed the truth beneath. Her father had faced an impossible choice and had chosen the greater good over his own survival. Now, She had done the same, rejecting wealth and power to preserve the ethical constraints he had died to protect. Some would call it naive. Keller certainly did. But standing there between her mother and the man who had finally become the steward her father had believed him to be, Charlotte knew it was the only choice she could have made. Jonathan Meyer's signature had changed the world once. Now his daughters would ensure that change remained a force for good, not destruction, a legacy worthy of the father she had never known but had finally come to understand. In the end, that was worth more than all the billions in the world.